Welcome to our webinar today on Understanding Application Adoption, hosted by Noah Software with primary content presented by Forrester Research. Understanding application adoption may be one of the CIO hot buttons for 2013 and beyond. Today's session will explore the issue and start to share a view of new tools that can optimize and improve the best practices in application adoption. If you step back, fundamentally, the question is, are we receiving the full value of our application investment? You as a large enterprise software customer have spent millions perhaps on licenses for core applications in CRM and ERP, critical infrastructure, millions on consulting to get this implemented and trained and deployed, millions in ongoing expense for change management and the BI reporting that surrounds it. And the question that you should reasonably ask is, are we receiving our full value of this investment, and how do we know? Where are we today? Where are we today with respect perhaps to our best-in-class users internally, let alone with our peers? How can we improve and make this better for all of us? So this is an exciting topic today. Our two presenters, our lead is JP Garbani, Vice President and Principal Analyst from Forrester, serving infrastructure and operations customers in predicting and quantifying IT disruptions. JP's expertise is broad and in the IT management software and IT operations marketplace, and his research examines the shifting industry dynamics used by customers and caused by economic pressures and the impacts of new technologies on these organizations. JP has several decades of experience as an IT designer, consultant, and client, most important client. JP has written extensively on technologies for several business publications, and we're delighted and pleased to have him here today. His session will be followed by Ilya Epstein, Senior Director of Pre-Sales Engineering for Noah Software. Ilya is a key manager for Noah, supporting customers globally with systems engineering and design of user experience management implementations and their ongoing deployment. Ilya is an expert in understanding how to apply this technology, coupled with perhaps some BPM tools to build out a complete view of application adoption and to help you measure your current state and take steps to improve it. So I'm delighted and pleased to have both of these speakers today. With that, I'm going to pass control over to JP Garbani and thank him for joining us today. JP?
Thank you, Michael, and welcome to everyone. My name is Michael said, is Jean-Pierre Garbani, and I work at Forrester Research, especially in infrastructure and operation. But I am originally and still in my heart a software engineer, and very proud of it. So today we're going to look at application adoption and why is it important. And part of it is the fact that our applications are more and more critical and complex in the business world. Everybody's depending on it. So we're going to look at the importance. We're going to look at how we can improve the business process through improving the application, and especially by measuring application adoption and see what should be modified, changed, adapted to the end user in order to make things better. And then we'll go to a conclusion. So the first point that I would like to make is that effectively for the past 50 years we have tried to improve the business process by bringing applications first in the back office as a batch, as a system of record, then now to what we call at Forrester system of engagement, that is things that are close to the end user using different technologies like, of course, the desktop, the laptop, but also the mobile devices, tablets, and iPhone and things like that. What we want to do through these applications is actually automate a certain number of business processes, makes it more efficient. But this efficiency, that is reflected here in terms of how we can measure it doesn't take into account the way people are using applications, I would say the root cause of the success of the business process. As you see here, people are judging the success of their business process based on the number of end results. Okay, percent of complete and accurate result of a business process, or the percent of output without rework. These are the measurements that we're using today to look at critical business processes. The things we don't do is, why is it that way? Why is it that a process will require rework? Is it because the application is bad? Is it because the application is not understood by the end user or by a majority of end user, and therefore they have difficulties using it and completing their work? Despite that, we see that business applications that support these business processes are really the key, a priority for many enterprises. There is no way today that we can effectively escape the information systems, the automation through application of business processes. We are so much dependent on it simply because of the volume of business transactions that are going through all the internet and all the networks in the world. But, and this is one of my favorite pictures, and I can tell you that I've been in IT 45 years. I started as a software engineer in early 1968. And that picture was already used at the time, which means that we haven't made many progress in this bridging the gap between the end user, the business user, the employee, and the creator of application, that is the IT software engineer. So we see here, how things from a simple, requirement are complexified somehow, or changed, or misunderstood. And I was talking with Michael about a perfect example of a healthcare organization which is screening customers. In the past, a month ago, they would take a blood sample and send it to a lab. The lab will analyze the blood sample for 3 or 4 key indicators and send the results back. And this was done through FedEx, and of course it was costing a lot of money because we're talking about thousands of samples. So what they did is that they acquired a little device that could be connected to a laptop, and you put just a sample of the customer blood in the device, and then fill in a certain number of forms, and that is sent to the lab electronically. They will process this within 2 hours and send the results back. So very much, an improvement over the previous process. The problem is that the technicians who are on site, who are doing the screening, who are taking the blood sample and everything, have absolutely no idea of how to use the application. So the forms are complex, they are difficult. They have been thought not by a technician, but by a software engineer. And the logic that is used is totally, I would say, impenetrable by the end user. So what happened is that yesterday someone was telling me that they have actually 25,000 samples, blocked in the lab because they cannot reconcile that with the application because all the fields are not, completed as they should, etc., etc. So that's really, what happens when this dichotomy between requirements, usability, understanding of the logic of the business process goes totally astray in application development. What amplifies the problem is and this is a chart that I've created from a number of statistics, and of course I don't have a statistic on applications, so I use operating systems as an example. But Watts Humphrey, who, as you probably know, was one of the fathers of software engineering, realized that not only the cost of hardware components is decreasing exponentially, which is the red line here, but the capacity, as you know, of these components is actually increasing exponentially. And he noticed that this expansion, this exponential expansion in terms of capacity and speed, is actually filled up by code very quickly. So the code that we're putting on machines is actually growing exponentially as the machines are more powerful. And the problem is that you can, using this limited but increased capacity, you can complexify things as much as you want. As a software engineer, you are given free rein to create things that you think are useful, you think are helping the customer, but which actually are not. In the whole thing, if you did a couple of mistakes per thousand of lines of code in a previous version, well, if it grows exponentially, it's now going to be a lot of mistakes the next generation. And that's really where we have a big issue with applications. So, given that, the question that we can ask ourselves is whether we are really getting the most potential out of these applications. Are we creating applications that are, confusing the end user, that are too complex for the average person to use? And how does that impact our critical business processes? And especially, how can we measure that objectively? Of course, you can tell me that there are things that everybody is using today, on touch screen that are very intuitive, very easy to use. But these are, apps that are not critical business system of records application, which, are the heart and the blood of the enterprise. These things have to be, treaded carefully because they can create, absolute mishaps in the business. So if we look at the common cause of, why these applications are not good or why they are not used as we think they are, at least, by some people, we certainly have in a population of employees a certain number of people who will understand the logic that has been followed by the developer, and a number of people for whom that logic will be absolutely obscure. And that's the difficulty that software, as I said, as a professional developer, as a professional software engineer, software is an expression of the developer. That's a translation of the idea that the developer had about a certain business process. And here is kind of an illustration. Okay, what is the root cause of these issues? Well, it's the lack of understanding of how processes execute, what is needed to go across boundaries in that process. The perfect example of my screening organization where, there is clearly a barrier, a gap between the developer, type of users that he or she develops the software for, and the lab that does the critical analysis. analysis. So, because of this misunderstanding of the boundaries, and there is no trusted metrics that you can use to measure that, whether they really understand it or they don't, or whether the logic is adapted to the job or not. And, the last reason is that training is not certainly adequate, okay? Because you can pass a certain number of things through training, but the complexity may create or may force a training session that is a lot longer that is actually delivered. That's one of the things that the person I was talking to last night told me, that actually she went through the training and actually she's a PhD, so she said, well, I should understand that relatively clearly. And she said after a day of training, I couldn't use that application. It was for me impossible. The logic behind it didn't talk to me. That's really what we want to detect. So we say, well, how can we detect the problem? Well, we look at IT operation, which is where I work right now, and we have this fantastic statistic that says, well, here is our application, and it supports this business process, and we have this type of error distribution, failure distribution. So, and we have a big bucket here that says user errors. That's why the application has failed. If you want to look at the end result, your business process failed because the application failed, and this application failed because of user error. And that's it. It's user error. But what type of error? Why an error? Was it an error in the way things were presented that could be corrected? Was it an error due to the complexity of the user interface? Or was it an error in the way the end user used effectively this application? Well, what we can conclude today, definitely talking about human interface to machine specialist, is that each of us has a certain way of understanding an issue, understanding a problem. We come at it from different angles, and my logic may not be your logic, and therefore intuitive doesn't mean the same thing. I joke sometimes, when I look at my phone and the way the menus are built, and I say, well, this has been obviously designed by a hardware engineer, because very early on in my career, when I was looking at test software for testing the hardware, I would simply laugh, because for a software engineer, it was absolutely non-logical. And that's really, an illustration. So the users may not completely understand the business process or understand it a certain way. And the application, supporting that process by consequence, by way of consequence, is not perfectly perceived. And its usefulness and the right way in which it should be used is not understood. Its importance is not understood. So, but as I say, we don't know. We don't know because we never look at it, we never measure it, and we never stand behind some person, using the software to say, no, that's not the way you should use it. Okay. So, one of the things that I think complicates things for end users, and which unfortunately we cannot do anything about today, is the fact that we moved from dialogues, a pure sequential progress through the application software, which may have already been challenging for some people in terms of getting the data right, to a kind of a stateless certain sequence, and then, the end user realized that, oh, I didn't want that seed, but let's go back. And you go back and you lose all the data that was collected. Therefore, you've got to go back one other stage to start again, etc. The application or the type of result that you're getting from that is certainly a lot more confusing than what it was before, when we were actually using a pure sequential no choice type of application. So, what can we do? As I said, we can create a production line. Okay, we can force people into a certain direction. We can, do things, or we can try to measure how these, how this process works, and actually what is the role of training, what is the role of change management, what are the things that we should adapt to improve business adoption and eventually to improve the end result of the business process. So the first thing I believe is that we need to assess what's going on. We need to understand what's going on. Okay? And I say here, if we cannot measure it, we cannot improve it. So we have got to understand how a typical end user is reacting. And there may be different classes of end users. There may be people, as I said, who are perfectly, at ease with the logic of the application presented in front of them. And there may be people who are totally lost in face of the same application. And so we have got to understand that. We have got to understand why it is that these people, good users are, finding this adequate, and why the other users are not, able to perform the same thing. What is the difference in logic? What are the things that they don't do right, or that they don't perceive the right way? Okay, and we can do that, by adding a class of tools such as end user experience monitoring, sitting on the end user device, which is capable of bringing us data about what is it that, what type of operation, what is it that the end user is doing when they are, facing that user interface. So once we have done that, we have the basic data, so we need to create a process that compares the different level of end users. Why is it different? How, can we classify them and detect what is different and understand the user differences? Okay. It is not simply a question of saying, well, this was an idiot because he doesn't understand the application, and this one is a bright person, good employee because she does understand everything. There might be something else, okay? And especially there might be, a need to reconcile the thought of the developers with the different level of adoption. Can we then, once we have collected all this data and analyzed the end user, the end result, can we then define a remedy, create, either by changing slightly or improving the application, or changing the workflow of the business process to be more adapted to the different end users. That's really, when we have reached that point that we have really, through application adoption, understood why some processes work and some don't. So, as a conclusion, I want you to remember that we're not talking about application usability, we're talking about application adoption. It may be some of the problems that we have in adoption may be the result of usability. So, but that's, the analysis that is going to client with a usability lab. These clients don't understand adoption. They don't measure adoption. They do usability labs, in their development center, in their excellence center. But they certainly don't do, measurement in the field, in the real life, with real users to understand adoption. So, top of my conclusion is that the end user is key. Okay, it has to be monitored at the workstation level using UEM, and then we can start doing adoption analysis as a follow-up to that data collection. With this, I would like to thank you very much for listening, and I'll leave the floor to Michael.
The first thing that you'll note is because we're using an agent-based technology, we're able to monitor key enterprise applications, including SIG client applications like SAP ERP. It could be web applications like Siebel CRM, and it could even be cloud applications like Salesforce.com, where visibility inherently is very limited. One of the things that's really unique about how we measure adoption is that when we talk about active time in a system or an active time within a transaction or a screen, it's a true active time. It's not just the amount of time people are logged into the system. Those types of metrics you could get from other sources, but they don't really give you true measurement of adoption. How often, users log in to key applications that are critical to their business role, but actually don't work in them and use workarounds, they use other solutions to actually execute their tasks. With a NOAA solution, because it's an agent-based technology, we're able to measure the true active time people are spending within each enterprise application. But we go really further, we go deep. Because it's an agent that really understands the layout of each of these applications, whether it's SAP, whether it's Siebel, whether it's Salesforce, we can actually break down the adoption by each individual module, whether it's a transaction, whether it's a business process, whether it's a specific screen. And we go really deep. And this is all out of the box. You do not need to predefine these screens. You don't need to predefine these modules. Automatically, the agent senses and understands all of the navigation paths, all of the workflows, and all of the screens that the user ends up touching. So now, within each screen, and let me focus in here in sales account management, you could see that what JP talked about, these variations from the field in terms of how people are actually using the specific application. Why is this account detail screen, which is critical to the overall sales process, why do you have such a large disparity between the different locations within your organization, or between different departments or roles or functional roles and things like that? Now, if you want to go deeper and try to analyze this disparity and actually see who are your super users, why are some users spending hours within that screen and some users that are barely touching it, you have all of that information at your fingertips. So when you're trying to start working on remediation and try to get these users to become the super user, you have the analytics and the metrics to be able to support that. One additional point I want to talk about is trend analysis. Because we're doing this continuous monitoring all the time across your entire user population, you also have baselines and benchmarks for adoption. So for example, in this dashboard, the blue line represents the actual adoption rate for this account management screen for a 2-week period in April. The black line that you can see here represents the projected usage that should be in the system based on historical use. And this gap between these two lines is what we call an adoption gap. So with a NOAA solution, for the first time, you can actually not only measure the true adoption of each application, each module, each screen, but you can actually see very proactively where you're having those drops in adoption. And that's something that's only possible and it's only enabled through the agent-based technology that NOAA provides. So now let's talk about, what are some of these causes? What are some of the root causes for the drops in adoption? And for that, I'm going to take a look at a business process KPI dashboard. One of the great things about the NOAA solution is that you could actually import your business processes into the NOAA system, whether it's order management, whether it's financial close, material management. All of these processes can be imported into the NOAA system. So what happens is the end user KPIs in terms of the active time or the active number of users are now reported in the context of these business processes. So for example, here we could clearly see a drop in adoption across some of the most critical processes that you have defined in your organization. Now, what are some of the reasons why you have that drop? In some cases, it could be a poor performance of the system. The response time is going up. We see this correlation in the field all the time. The system becomes slow. Maybe you did an upgrade, you did a new rollout, and all of a sudden the system just becomes unusable. So the users stop using it. They find other means to execute their tasks. Sometimes you could see other reasons. You could see maybe an increase in user errors. Maybe you introduced a new step in a process, a new screen, which is causing a lot of user errors, and that's why the users are not able to execute their function in a proper manner. With a NOAA solution, we provide you the tools not only to detect these variations in adoption and some of the root causes, but we can actually provide you the tools to remediate them. So with a click of a button, I could actually get into the details as to what is making up this financial accounting process, right? What are those steps that the users are taking? JP talked about the fact that there's a lot of different ways sometimes to execute the same process. Well, with a NOAA solution, dynamically, we can actually lay out all of the different components that constitute that financial accounting process. Again, completely out of the box without you having to do any type of scripting or predefinition of these processes. So in this dashboard, using a heat map, we could clearly identify that although the users are spending most of their time in this transaction, but most of the critical errors are actually happening right here. And we could actually pinpoint a specific location where the users are getting stuck, a very specific screen. So we're measuring an adoption, but one of the causes or one of the issues that can be leading to a poor adoption is a usability problem. Maybe the screen is not designed in the most optimal way. Or if you focus in on the end users, you can actually see a huge disparity between the user error rate between this user and his peers. Now, if you want to understand what is so special, why is this user getting so many errors? What are the steps that he take to get so many errors? And why is he deviating from his peers? With a click of a button, you could run a report to actually see the exact error message the user is getting, understand all of the times and specific events when this error has occurred. With a complete capture of the error message, the user error message is captured completely. There's no other solution that could do that out of the box. And then most importantly, if I want to actually troubleshoot and actually see historically what did the user do to get to that error, I pull up the workflow. And the workflow is completely unique to NOAA in that it actually captures step by step everything the end user is doing in the system. From the moment they logged in until they logged out, every step they took is captured. Every operation they click on, every error message they get from the system, all of those steps are captured. So what happens is when you're trying to remediate some of these issues in adoption and you're trying to solve the problem, you don't need to spend a lot of time going back and forth with the end user to try to understand what did he do. You have all that information at your fingertips. You could then compare this workflow, for example, to his peers who are not getting that error and understand where the user has variated from a predefined process. This workflow is tremendous not only in functional support, but it really helps you to optimize your workflows, optimize your business processes, so that ultimately you could improve your adoption rate. So these are some of the use cases we wanted to show today to demonstrate the technology that powers the adoption monitoring with NOAA. There are other use cases for NOAA, including in functional support and training and other user sustainment services.
Well, thank you, Ilya. That was an excellent presentation. Also, thanks again to JP Garbani and Forrester for providing the content. You can see this presentation again on demand. We'll send a link to the attendees.